All right, ready to get our hands sticky. Today we're doing a deep dive into Pidilite Industries.
The Fevical folks.
Yeah, exactly. Fevical, M-Seal, Fevikwik.
Those guys.
But it's interesting, right? They're not just about those consumer products that we all know and love.
No, they're much bigger than that.
Yeah, they're huge in the industrial and construction sectors as well. To really get a grip on how this company is performing, we're going to dig into their Q2 FY25 financials.
Okay, so cracking open the books.
We got their official report and presentation slides, and we'll be looking at some analyst questions, too.
Ooh, getting into the nitty-gritty.
By the time we're done, you'll understand what's driving their performance and what it all means for the future.
The future of glue, exciting?
Well, and the future of the Indian economy.
Oh, right, because Pidilite's so tied into that whole picture.
It's like a sticky economic indicator. So let's start with the top line. Pidilite reported a solid 7% year-on-year revenue growth for Q2.
Not bad, not bad.
And get this, that growth is fueled by an 8% increase in sales volume.
So people are actually buying more. That's a good sign.
Right, it's not just about price increases. And their standalone profit after tax, which basically tells you how much profit they're making from their core business in India,
Right.
that jumped by 19.2% compared to last year.
So their bread and butter business is doing really well.
Exactly. But wait, it gets a little more complicated when we look at their consolidated numbers. If we exclude certain international subsidiaries,
Right.
their net sales growth dips to 6.6%.
Interesting.
So there are some specific markets where they're facing some challenges.
Not surprising, I guess.
Yeah.
Growth isn't always going to be perfectly even across the board.
Right. And to understand those variations, we need to look at their different segments and geographies.
Okay, peel back those layers of the onion.
Let's start with the consumer-facing side, the C&B segment. You know, the products you see in stores.
Gotcha.
That segment slowed down a bit in Q2.
Oh, why is that? You ready for this? Monsoon rains.
Monsoon rains,
Yeah.
really. Yeah, those heavy rains actually dampened demand early in the quarter, especially for consumer products.
Huh. I guess that makes sense. If it's raining, people aren't going out shopping.
Exactly. It makes it harder to transport things, construction slows down, people just stay home.
Yeah, Mother Nature can really throw a wrench in things.
But here's where it gets interesting. Within the C&B segment, rural markets actually did better than urban ones.
Wait, really?
Yep.
But I thought the urban market was usually stronger.
You would think, right? But remember, a lot of India's rural population depends on agriculture.
Right.
And this year, they had a good monsoon season.
Ah, so more rain means better crops, which means more money for rural consumers.
Exactly. More money means more spending power. So demand for Pidilite's products was stronger in rural areas.
Fascinating how these things are all connected.
Now let's look at their B2B segment, which caters to those big industrial and construction projects.
Okay, so the heavy-duty stuff.
This is where Pidilite really shines.
Yeah.
They saw a 21% volume growth in this segment.
Wow, that's huge.
It's directly tied to the massive infrastructure push in India.
All of those new roads and bridges and airports.
Exactly. All that construction requires tons of adhesives, sealants, construction chemicals.
So Pidilite's basically supplying the glue that's holding India's growth story together.
I like that, the glue holding it all together. Now, let's zoom out and look at their global footprint. Their international subsidiaries, excluding the U.S. and Brazil,
Right.
they managed to hit double-digit growth.
Even with all the global economic uncertainty. That's impressive.
It really is. And their Asian markets particularly did exceptionally well. They delivered a 17% EBITDA growth.
EBITDA. Remind me what that is again?
It's essentially a measure of their operating profitability.
Got it.
So their Asian operations are becoming increasingly profitable.
That's a good sign for their expansion strategy in Asia.
Definitely. But back to their domestic subsidiaries, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Remember, the B2B segment is doing great, but the C&B segment faced those headwinds we talked about.
Right, the rain.
Yeah.
It just goes to show that different sectors can experience totally different realities, even within the same country.
Makes sense.
Okay, now let's talk margins. Both gross and EBITDA margins expanded in Q2.
Meaning,
They're making more profit on each sale.
and investors love that.
They do. Pidilite's been really good at keeping costs under control, even with inflation.
How have they managed that?
One reason they cited was benign input prices. Basically, the raw materials they use to make their products haven't gotten that much more expensive.
So they've been lucky with their suppliers.
In a way, yeah, but makes you wonder how long that can last. What if input prices start rising again?
Right. That's a good question. We'll have to keep an eye on that.
For sure. But let's not forget that Pidilite is constantly innovating.
Always coming up with new things.
Their presentation highlights their commitment to R&D and technology, even though Q2 didn't see any major product launches.
So they're playing the long game.
Exactly. And their product portfolio is huge, over 6,200 SKUs.
Wow, that's a lot of different products. That tells me they're serious about meeting a wide range of customer needs.
They've got a glue for every occasion.
You could say that. But it's not all smooth sailing. The competition is heating up, especially in the construction chemical space, which is a key growth area for Pidilite.
So who are they up against?
We'll dig into that more in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
But it's definitely something to keep in mind. Pidilite is a leader, but they can't afford to get complacent.
No, not in this market. It's amazing how Pidilite's performance is so connected to what's happening in the Indian economy.
It really is. Like, remember how we were talking about rural markets actually doing better than urban ones?
Oh yeah, that was interesting.
It's not often you see that. So what's driving that rural surge, and how long can we expect it to last?
Well, like we said before, India's rural economy depends a lot on agriculture. And this year, the monsoon season was really good.
So more rain equals better crops, which means more money in the pockets of rural consumers.
Exactly. And that means they have more purchasing power, which is good news for companies like Pidilite that have a strong presence in those markets. But it's not just the monsoon. There are also government policies aimed at rural development and infrastructure. They play a big part in boosting the rural economy.
So it's a mix of natural factors and government initiatives.
Yeah, you could say that. And the outlook for rural markets looks pretty good right now, but it really depends on how all these different factors change over time.
Makes sense. Now, going back to the global picture for a second, Pidilite's presentation mentioned some geopolitical uncertainties on the horizon.
Oh yeah, that's always a concern.
You can't ignore those global tremors. What specific geopolitical concerns are they talking about, and how could those affect a company like Pidilite?
That's the big question, isn't it? The global landscape is always changing. We've got conflicts, trade tensions, and these unpredictable shifts in global alliances. It can all have a ripple effect on multinational companies like Pidilite.
Like a big game of Jenga, one wrong move and the whole tower comes crashing down.
I like that analogy. And for a company with global operations like Pidilite, these geopolitical risks can mean disrupted supply chains, fluctuating currency exchange rates, even changes in consumer demand.
Wow, so many moving parts.
It's a lot to keep track of. So how's Pidilite dealing with these geopolitical challenges? Are they just hoping for the best, or are they actually doing something to manage these risks?
Well, from their presentation, it seems like they are acknowledging these risks. They're not ignoring them.
At least they're aware.
Right. They emphasize that they're keeping an eye on things and changing their strategies as needed.
Good. That's reassuring.
Yeah, it shows they understand that being flexible is really important in today's world. Speaking of challenges, let's talk about the competition Pidilite's facing.
Yeah, you mentioned it's getting more intense, especially in construction chemicals.
It is. Can you tell us who the main players are in this space? Who should Pidilite be watching out for?
Well, Pidilite is the top dog in India, but there are other companies trying to catch up. You've got domestic players like Asian Paints and Burger Paints.
Oh, right, the paint companies.
They're moving into the construction chemicals market.
Makes sense. They already have brand recognition and distribution networks.
Exactly. And then you have the global giants like BASF and Sikil. They have a ton of resources and experience in construction chemicals. They bring a whole new level of competition.
So Pidilite's facing competition from both local and international players.
That's right. So how are they responding? Are they just relying on what they're already good at, or are they coming up with new strategies?
Well, it looks like they're doing a bunch of things. They're definitely focusing even more on innovation.
Okay, makes sense.
They have 5 R&D centers in India and 1 in Singapore. They're constantly working on new products and formulas.
So staying ahead of the curve.
And they're really focused on expanding their distribution network, both in India and abroad.
Right. They've talked about their network of distributors and warehouses.
They're always working to improve and optimize that network, but honestly, innovation and distribution are kind of expected these days. What else is Pidilite doing to stand out and connect with their customers?
They're putting a lot of effort into building a strong brand identity. Think about those Fevical ads. They're so memorable.
Yeah, they're quirky and funny. They've definitely created an emotional connection with their brand.
And they're not just doing traditional advertising. They're also interacting with customers more directly, building relationships through workshops, demonstrations, even on social media.
So creating a sense of community around their brands.
Exactly. That's a great way to build customer loyalty. Oh, before we move on to the management's outlook, there's one more thing I wanted to bring up. Their presentation mentioned sustainability and ESG principles.
Right, that's becoming more and more important for investors and consumers.
Companies can't just focus on profits anymore. They need to think about their impact on the environment and society.
So how is Pidilite handling this? Are they actually making an effort, or is it just talk?
It seems like they're taking concrete steps. They're trying to reduce their carbon footprint, use raw materials responsibly, and even getting involved in social initiatives to help communities.
Okay, that's good to hear.
But we need to see if they actually follow through on those commitments. Actions speak louder than words, right?
Absolutely. It'll be interesting to watch how their sustainability efforts develop in the future. All right, so we've talked about a lot with Pidilite Industries, their financials, their global expansion, the competition, even sustainability. But before we wrap up, let's take a look ahead. What does Pidilite's management say about the rest of FY25 and the future?
Well, they seem cautiously optimistic about the second half of the fiscal year.
Oh, cautiously optimistic. What makes them feel that way?
Well, a few things. First, they're expecting continued strength in the rural markets. That good monsoon season we talked about should lead to higher rural incomes.
Right, and that benefits Pidilite.
Exactly. And it's not just the monsoon. They're also anticipating more government spending on infrastructure.
Which we know has been helping their B2B segment.
Right. And they're also predicting an increase in new construction activity, which is good for their construction chemicals and adhesives.
So they've got a few things working in their favor. Strong rural demand, government spending, a construction revival. Sounds like a solid foundation for growth.
Yeah, you could say that. But they are a bit cautious.
Oh, why is that?
Geopolitical uncertainty. That's still a big question mark.
Right, those global events can really shake things up.
Exactly. So while they're optimistic about the near future, they're also being realistic about potential challenges.
So optimism, but with a dose of reality. So after all this, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What should they be thinking about?
I think the main thing is that Pidilite is a company that knows how to adapt. They're taking advantage of growth opportunities both in India and globally, while staying aware of potential risks.
They're not just riding the wave, they're actually steering the ship.
Uh-huh. Yeah, good analogy. And in the end, their success depends on keeping that balance, continuing to innovate, expanding their reach, building relationships with customers, all while managing costs and navigating those geopolitical challenges.
Sounds like a tough job.
It is. But any final thoughts for our listeners before we go? Something for them to think about?
How about this? Will Pidilite's focus on innovation and expansion be enough to keep them on top with all this competition and global uncertainty?
That's a great question. We'll have to see how it all plays out.
Exactly. And there you have it, folks. We've covered a lot of ground, from Fevical to geopolitics. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Pidilite as much as we did.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Remember, the business world is always changing, and companies like Pidilite are right in the middle of it all. Stay curious, keep learning, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.
See you then.